Okay, so it's just turned 11 o'clock. Let's make a start. I can still see quite a few people joining. So welcome everybody to this morning's webinar, and thank you ever so much for taking the time out of your day to come and listen to me talking about Azure Sentinel. My name is Mathew Richards. I'm Head of Mobility and Security at Third Space. So as far as an agenda, what we're going to have is a very quick poll just to kick things off before I then move into just giving you a sort of level setting few slides talking about where Azure Sentinel fits with the wider XDR solution set from Microsoft. We'll spend most of the time in the demos part of the webinar where I'll take you through Sentinel, various aspects of Sentinel. We'll particularly look at some of the automation capabilities, but we'll also touch on a number of different areas as well. We'll then move on to another quick poll. And then after that, we'll talk about some potential next steps that you may be interested in. And then that followed by some questions. So on that note, if you do have questions as we progress through with the webinar, please enter those into the GoToWebinar control panel. There should be quite a clear questions sort of section of that control panel where you can enter those. Now, those questions that are technical, I'll cover those at the end. In the question section. If you do have any challenges with GoToWebinar, then please enter your, put your particular issue into the chat box, and we do have somebody on standby that can potentially help you resolve those. What is, or where does, obviously the topic of this webinar is going to be Azure Sentinel, but where does that sit in terms of, the overall product suite from Microsoft? Well, what we have is a combination of two technologies here, Microsoft Defender XDR, which I'll sort of explain what that is in a second, as a depth series of technologies that are specialists in their respective areas, looking at security signals and insights, surfacing then those insights into Azure Sentinel, which is more of the broader security visibility technology. So the SIEM technology, security incident and event management technology, that is Azure Sentinel, and that can then correlate and give you that sort of holistic view. So from a Sentinel perspective, Sentinel is a cloud native SIEM. It's built for the cloud from the ground up. Very important point to make that, because that enables Microsoft then to iterate regularly on their improvements and developments and release those without any impact to the existing service. So we can also consume pretty much any data into Sentinel. We've been working with Sentinel for, well, since its release, and actually quite a while beforehand, but we've not come across a scenario yet where we're not unable to ingest any information into it. Obviously that target or the source needs to be accessible, goes without saying really, but if there is some sort of interface available, then we can pretty much be rest assured we can ingest that. Sentinel has got a lot of artificial intelligence built into it, so a whole plethora of machine learning models that Microsoft continue to evolve and add, that surface the important security insights to you. And then from an automation perspective, extensive capability around being able to respond to incidents. There are reasons why we might want to respond, obvious being to remediate or to mitigate any potential threat. If we then look at the Microsoft XDR solution set from Microsoft, this is what those technologies are focused at. So identities, devices, data, infrastructure, applications, and network. So XDR meaning extended detection and response capabilities, looking at a broad range of different domains here being different sort of areas of focus. So Microsoft Defender XDR is actually broken up into two key components. One which is Microsoft 365 Defender, and some of the technology in here might be familiar to you. So within here, we've got a collection of discrete products which focus on these entities here, so identities, endpoints, applications, email, and so forth. So the technologies within here are things like Defender for Endpoint, Defender for Identity, Defender for Office 365, and Cloud App Security as well. So those four technologies combine together to form the 365 Defender solution. On the right-hand side then, putting a focus more on the infrastructure side of things, we have Azure Defender. So these obviously these technologies focus on the areas on the slide there. So typical infrastructure type components. So from a virtual machine perspective, we can provide security monitoring and protection for things like Windows servers, Linux servers that reside anywhere really, whether it be in the Azure platform on premises within your location or your office. Also any other cloud platforms, so GCP, AWS, and wherever else you may have any particular server workloads. But Azure Defender can extend to cover things like Azure SQL, network components, Internet of Things, which is becoming an increasingly important area of visibility, and also various app services while running on the Azure platform. So those two key components, Microsoft 365 Defender and Azure Defender, combined together to provide the Microsoft Defender extended detection and response capability. And all of these then fit together in this sort of basic diagram. So we have the specialist technologies provided through the XDR solution set. These are things that have a particular focus in life, a purpose. So whether it be endpoint, email, VMs, network, IoT, etc., they surface those security insights and incidents that may be necessary. And those then are fed into Sentinel as that overarching, more broad technology that can complement what it gets from the XDR technologies to cater for things like network perimeter devices, a whole raft of different third-party technologies, and so on and so forth. Okay, and then if we look at Sentinel just a little more closely, the collection capability, if we start there with Sentinel, is extensive. So I mentioned this at the beginning. We're able to collect pretty much an endless source of different information sources. A SIEM wouldn't be a SIEM without extensive capabilities of being able to ingest security telemetry. So, we're blessed with that within Sentinel in that it's easy to consume, and we'll look more closely as we get into the demo as to some of the options there. Once we've collected that information and that's stored within Sentinel's repository, then it's all about detecting those threats or security insights, and that is based on a raft of different things, machine learning models I've mentioned already, but also analytic rules that look at very specific use cases. And analyze that data to surface important insights to you and your analysts. Investigative capabilities, extensive within the Sentinel platform. So when we get an incident, we're going to want to investigate it. And the whole purpose and sort of feature set of Sentinel really seeks to reduce that mean time to resolution. So some really innovative features and capabilities within the platform to help speed that process up. And then from a response perspective, and this is an area that we'll sort of dig in quite closely in the demo, the ability to be able to react to any incidents that get raised, whether that's to complement or to enrich an incident with additional information, again, saving time for your analysts, or whether it's to orchestrate certain activities within the environment. So maybe put a Teams notification out to your SOC team or security team, right through to integrating with third-party ticketing systems or whatever system it may be to manage the life cycle, if you like, of that incident. And then thirdly, the goal really here is to be able to react to an incident and fix it and remediate that particular incident, reduce that risk, remove the risk. So we need to be somewhat careful in that area because we don't want to create any end user impact. But where we have a high level of confidence with some of the incidents, then it makes sense that we react quickly. And that's the key, I think, in today's cyber landscape, is that we need the ability to be able to react very quickly to some of the security signals that we see to protect ultimately our data and our assets. Sentinel ingests this information, and that's the sort of licensing model. In fact, licensing model is completely incorrect because there's no license for Sentinel. It's based on an ingestion model. Good news is that we can take a number of feeds from the Microsoft platform that don't incur any charges. So things like Office 365 and Azure Active Directory feeds can be consumed without incurring any cost. And there's a whole raft of other areas that we can consume as well. Those will potentially incur cost. Lots of integration for the platform, and actually, riddled with machine learning models and artificial intelligence to really help you, manage that function of providing security for your organization. So surfacing those insights to you as quickly as possible. Okay, so we're going to jump into the demo. So bear with me 1 second while I just change screens. Okay, so what you can see is just, the Azure portal. This is the landing page. To get to Sentinel, obviously, if you've already set it up, is just a simple case of typing it in here or selecting it from the tile. So we'll do that from here. What we then get presented with is the repository for Sentinel. So this is based on a log analytics workspace, tried and tested, mature and robust repository that Sentinel takes advantage of. So we'll select the repository that I've got here. And then we're presented with Sentinel's landing screen, really, that, as you would expect, so to give you some information at a glance, the trend of events, are they going up or down over the last 24 hours? Same with alerts and incidents. We get a snapshot of the types of events and information that we're ingesting. If there were any incidents that triggered, current incidents that are triggering a security incident, then we can look at the geographic distribution of that on the map down here. I don't have any of those in this environment, so it's not lighting up. And then we can see some other metrics that would be useful for us to understand. So let's have a quick look at some of the options within Sentinel. So I guess the first place that we will need to start when we get Sentinel set up is to start feeding information, so ingesting security telemetry. So as you would expect, we'd go to the data connectors area of Azure Sentinel. And this is where we can see the out-of-the-box connectors that Microsoft provide that support a really wide range of third-party products and their own products as well. This list is growing regularly. It's not the definitive list of connectors that Microsoft support. There are other areas where we can get, some connectors to help us connect to systems and services and applications that may not exist in this list, and we'll touch on that in a minute. But what we can see is a wide range of connectors here. We can see some of the Microsoft ones here that I've got enabled, so Azure Active Directory, identity protection, and so on and so forth. As you would expect with any of the Microsoft services, if I scroll down, we should see 365 Defender somewhere. There it is. So I've got that enabled in this environment. If we were to click into that and have a look at that in a little bit more detail, then we can really see just how easy it is to connect these Microsoft sources of information. It's literally a tick in the box, really, with some options depending on what connector we're using. This one's already connected, obviously, so I'm only presented with a disconnect button, but if it wasn't, I would just select the connect button. It's as simple as that. There's some prerequisites here that are checked to make sure I have the relevant permission and license in order to be able to manage and configure this connector. And for this particular connector, then, because 365 Defender, if you remember from my previous slides, are made up of a number of products, so Defender for Endpoint, Defender for Office 365, Defender for Identity and Cloud App Security. We're looking at Defender for Endpoint here. We can see the options here to pull in additional information about the entities that exist or endpoints that exist within Defender for Endpoint. So we're providing additional information. On the right-hand side here, we can see some stats here around the growth or decline of information over time. Okay, let's go back to the home screen here. I'm not going to go through each one of these. I'll certainly tackle some of the key ones. But I think where we'll probably spend most of the time, at least to start with, is in the incidents area. So this is the area that we would go to within Sentinel to see what security insights and incidents that Sentinel has raised. I'm not seeing anything here within the 24 hours, but let me extend this to the last 30 days. So we should see some incidents that were, or that have been raised, that are now no longer active as such. These are ones that I've interacted with previously. We can see various ones here. The one that we're going to focus on really is activity from an infrequent country. So this one, as you might be able to see here, if I extend that across, has been raised from Microsoft 365 Defender. So 365 Defender has detected some activities that it deems is activity from an infrequent country based on the information it's aware of. And it's passed that incident through the connector I showed you previously into Sentinel. Now, Sentinel then will correlate that information with additional information it has available in order to give you that sort of more holistic view, or that sort of the ultimate goal here is to have visibility of the entire attack kill chain, so we can see, what happened at the beginning right through to, what were the activities at the end. So you'll typically spend quite a bit of time within Sentinel from an investigative perspective, but quite often you'll need to pivot into the depth or the specialist tools to get the real detail behind. And that's only if you've not been able to come to a conclusion based on your activities within Sentinel. So if we select this one, what we can see immediately on the right-hand side here is that it surfaces some pertinent information about this particular incident. So the entities involved, so I can see I've got a user involved here with some IP addresses. It's been aligned to the MITRE attack framework in terms of its initial access, the tactics and techniques that are used typically for initial access or compromise. And we can also see a whole host of other information here through tags. Now, I'll come on to this a little bit later. These are typically not produced or surfaced by default. These are things that you have the option to be able to configure and complement your instance with in order to speed up that time to resolution. So if we look at the full details of this incident, what we'll see is some additional information, the information we saw previously on the left-hand side here, and some timeline views here of what has happened. We can click on one of these and look at the information relating to this particular activity on the right-hand side. And so on and so forth. Equally, we can go across here to see some of the other information that Azure Sentinel services to, so the entities involved in this particular incident, and any comments as well. So this is a comment that I'll draw your attention to. This is obviously some detailed information relating to an IP address that exists within this incident. We'll come on to how I've done that shortly, but this is all about providing information at the analyst's fingertips in order to be able to make some educated decisions as to, is this something I need to worry about? Is it something I need to investigate in more detail, and so on and so forth. I mentioned earlier as well that this particular incident was surfaced from 365 Defender, and we can see that here. As well as in other areas within Sentinel. But what this allows us to do, if we need to investigate this in more detail, is pivot very easily directly to the 365 Defender portal, and that's exactly what I'm going to do here. So what you can see here is the new or relatively new 365 Defender portal or security portal. We can see at the top here that we can see all the incidents that the combination of those technologies, the 4 technologies I mentioned, have raised. We're looking at one particular incident here, the one that was referenced in Azure Sentinel. But what you're seeing in this portal, before I jump into the actual incident, what you're seeing in this portal is a consolidation, if you like, or bringing together of the different portals that exist today. So what we can see here is Defender for Endpoint and the ability to provide or to perform all the configuration and investigative activities that we need to perform with Defender for Endpoint. Rather than going to the older Defender for Endpoint portal, we can do all that now from within this new security portal. And exactly the same scenario with Defender for Office 365. So if I want to configure my phishing rules, my safe attachments, safe links, etc., perform some simulated attacks, and also importantly there to trigger training in line with some of those attack simulations that you send out. So all of that is now able to be managed and operated from within this single portal. So this is really, really important. This is addressing, comments that we hear often from our clients. Microsoft have heard it loud and clear. And they're making some really big strides into consolidating this. So from an operational perspective, making it one place to go for your sort of depth security configuration and operational activities. There's also a compliance equivalent as well, which I won't go into this webinar, but similar activities are happening there in consolidating all of those typical compliance activities into a single portal. What we can see here now is a bit more detailed information relating to the incident that we saw in Sentinel. So again, we can see here the various aspects or attributes of this incident, the users involved, the investigation, the evidence and response. Typically, we would in an ideal world, we would trigger automated investigations from Defender 365, which will seek to, add additional information and confirmation about any security incident that may have been raised. And there's extensive automation activities available within 365 Defender, right down to the ability to be able to block things immediately so that they take away all of those activities from you, they being Microsoft or 365 Defender, and seek just to self-heal or mitigate any particular security insights. One of the other things as well, so if I look at the users in this particular instance, we know it's Toby. If I click on Toby as a user, what we're now seeing is another consolidation of what we would typically see within Cloud App Security. So when we investigate identities, we go to Cloud App Security to get that sort of holistic investigative capability and visibility of all things relating to a given identity. That's being surfaced here within the security portal, again for convenience and clarity. Not a great deal of information here for this particular user, but hopefully you get the idea that you'll be able to see all the activities here relating to the user, what they've been doing, all the scores that have been applied in order to determine if this is a high priority identity that we need to investigate, and so on and so forth. Okay, so let's jump back into Sentinel and close this particular incident here. Actually, let's go back into that, sorry. So what we're now going to do is, again, focusing on this same incident, we're now going to surface one of Azure Sentinel's innovative ways of being able to investigate and assess a given incident. So we'll investigate it. And what that does is bring up a graphical representation of this particular incident. So we can see here we've got an activity from an infrequent country incident here, and its relationship with other activities and insights and entities as interpreted by Sentinel. So we can see here that it's got the IP address entities. Sorry, let's make that a little bit bigger. Got the IP address entities here. If we hover over these, we can start getting some information in context relating to this IP address. I'm not going to click on here because this is going to tell me about this single IP address, which I already know. But if we were to look at, let's say, Toby here, then we could look at some of the additional, if there were any additional account fail logons, etc., or indeed successful logons, and so on and so forth. So you're able to select those in line, and it will bring those up on the screen for you in line and in context with this particular incident. Let's just minimize that a little bit more. We can see various other bits here. I'm not going to go into detail in these, but if we look at the timeline, you probably see a number of additional items here. We've got 2, but hopefully you can see if I hover over these different timeline events, then we can see the different aspects of the graphical representation of this incident lighting up and the others dimming down. So it draws our attention to the relevant sort of time frame and activities that are appropriate for this incident. Lots of other areas here that we can get some insights and entities and so on and so forth. Let's close that for now. Okay, so let's go back to the Sentinel home screen. So we work within here, within this incident panel of the Azure Sentinel portal. This will really serve as your unified incident queue, incident and alert queue. So taking feeds from wherever relevant within your organization and surfacing those here. So it's one place to go to understand what incidents are currently active within my environment. I showed you some of I drew your attention to some of the tags and indeed some of the comments that were placed within an incident. So you're probably thinking, how is that achieved? In fact, you can see some of the comments here, not in a great dialog box here. You typically want to get that more real estate with when you click on the full details bit there. But let me take you through how I've done that. So what we're going to do now is move over to the automation side of Azure Sentinel. What we can see here is 2 aspects of the SOAR capabilities of Sentinel. The first being some basic automation rules. As you can see, I've got one here, and I'll dig into that in a second. And the other aspect are playbooks, so automated playbooks. Again, we'll dig into one of those in detail shortly. But if we just look at this automation rule, I'll open that up. This is really just a really simple way of being able to describe some automated activities that you want to perform against all, some, or a collection of incidents. And we can define those conditions as to what incidents I want this automation rule to react to. In this example, I'm reacting to everything, really, but we've got various different operators that we're able to choose. We can add different conditions and then really refine that to look at, if you've got a specific incident or type of incident that you need to trigger an activity against, then you can identify that through the conditions here. Once we define the conditions, then we're looking at, well, okay, I've identified the condition. What action do you want me to perform? In this example, I've chosen to run a playbook, and this is the playbook that we'll dig into in a second. But we can do a few different things here: add tags if necessary, assign owner, change status, etc., etc. And then how long should this be active for? In this example, it's just forever, indefinite. So what we're going to do now is cancel that. We'll go and have a look at the playbooks. So playbooks are actually based on an existing technology on the Azure platform called Logic Apps. So Logic Apps have been around for quite some time. Robust, tried and tested technology with extensive catalog of connectors available for a whole host of different services, applications, and similar things, not just Microsoft technologies as you would expect. So I've got some various playbooks here, and I'll come on to towards the end of this and how easy it is to get these into Azure Sentinel. But what we're going to do is look at one particular playbook to start with, which is the playbook that's responsible for creating those tags in the incident that I showed you earlier and in the comments as well. So that's the Geo IP Information IPQS playbook, or Logic App rather. So now we're into the Logic Apps part of the Azure platform. We can see, run history and so on and so forth. And I'm not going to dig into the ins and outs of this. What we're going to focus really is what does this Logic App actually do? So I go to the Logic App Designer to get a graphical representation of this. Now, this is something that you probably will be working within predominantly in terms of it's so much easier to define a workflow or a series of activities in a graphical format as opposed to looking at it in some sort of code view. However, There are people who prefer to work in this, and indeed there are more granular capabilities and the ability to perform maybe slightly different activities within the code. So we have the option to do both. But for this example, we're going to stay within the graphical designer area. So we can see here that this is triggered based on an incident that gets raised. What we then do is perform some activities here, and this is very specific to what you're trying to do. So in this example, I'm using a third-party service to reach out and provide an IP address, and I'm expecting some detailed information relating to that IP address. So we'll look at some of those information, some of that information that's provided back. We've got some sort of preparatory formatting type activity here that we're initializing, ready to receive the results from the third-party service that we're using. And then we move into looking at, grabbing the entities within the incident. So we've captured the incident. Now we're capturing all the entities that exist within that incident. So an entity could be anything really. In this instance, it's going to be an IP address, but could also be a username, a device, and so on and so forth. So with the entities captured, we're now looking to do some work against those, and specifically we're extracting out of that entities array the IP address or IP addresses. And basically what we're saying here is for each and every IP address that exists within the incident, I want you to submit a request to this third-party service, which is ipqualityscore.com. And I'm passing the API key that I provisioned earlier or initialized earlier. I'm also passing the IP address here within the URL that I'm submitting. And then I expect to get some results. So when I get the results back, this is the area where I'm sort of preparing the JSON really that describes the results. So this is specific to the format that's provided by IP Quality Score. And then I'm going to move on to looking at some conditions then. So if this request is successful, I have received some information back from IP Quality Score, then progress down the left-hand side here, the true branch. If it fails, i.e. maybe no response, no results relating to an IP address, then all I'm going to do is follow this right-hand false path and just append some information into the comment, which is the IP doesn't exist. So with the information that we've got back from IP Quality Score, what we're doing now is formatting this in an HTML table. So hopefully this makes clear sense really, in that we're plugging in the relevant results that we've got back from IP Quality Score into a formatted HTML table. So you're at will to customize this as you see fit, changing colors, formats, and so on and so forth. Then what we want to do is add some comments really to the table, the incident rather, and that's this task is pretty simple. So we're grabbing the incident ARM ID, so the unique identifier of that incident, and then the comments field of that incident, we're going to output what we formatted in the previous step. So that's that formatted HTML table. Once we've done that, we also want to add some tags. So we're grabbing some other entities or attributes of that incident, and then we're going to add some tags. So we can see here ISP, city, region, country code, and so on and so forth. We get VPN, but that's not immediately obvious. These are usually Boolean type responses. Is it a VPN, yes or no? So we want to prefix that with some words to make sure it's clear. But obviously that's entirely up to you how you represent that. So lots of flexibility here and being able to cater for all sorts of different automated activities. I mean, this is one that enriches an incident to provide more information for your analysts in order to make some educated decisions as to what needs to happen with that particular incident. But we can, there's a whole raft of other automated activities. This is just a very basic list, and I'm not really going to dig into these in any great detail. But for instance, there's a block Active Directory, Azure Active Directory user playbook here, which means, if we see a certain condition that we think actually the response to this is that we need to block that account, then we can leverage this block Azure AD user logic app, which I've got from the Microsoft GitHub Repository. and I'll show you where that lives in a second. Very easy to import, and then it's just a case of configuring the appropriate attributes or parts of this logic app. So again, we're grabbing the entities, we're looking at the accounts, we're going to update the user and block that user based on what we found. Okay, so let's go back here. So I've mentioned, the Github repository. Microsoft provide a huge library of different Sentinel artifacts, some that appear within the portal that are there available to you to use immediately, some that exist within the Github repository. So how do you get those? Well, the easiest way to do that, if you just navigate to the community area of the portal and then go to the Azure Sentinel community, or just do a search for Azure Sentinel GitHub repository. So I've clicked on that, and this is taking me to the Microsoft GitHub repo for Azure Sentinel. So we can see a whole raft of different artifacts here that would be relevant. Now, these are artifacts that are being developed by Microsoft and field engineers and consultants within Microsoft, as well as a global community of people who contribute, useful and valuable pieces of Sentinel configuration, for want of a better word, really. So we can see we've got all sorts of things like hunting queries, we've got data connectors, dashboards, workbooks, watch lists. We should see playbooks here somewhere. So if we look at the playbooks one, we can see, quite a large list of playbooks that you're able just to grab. So, for instance, if I was to choose, I don't know, confirm Azure AD risky user, I'm not actually going to trigger this one yet, but if we go into any of these artifacts within the GitHub repo, what we can see is a lot of information about it, some stuff to read about. But if we decide we want this in our Azure environment, then what we can do is just say, well, I'll just deploy that to Azure, please. And what that will do is initiate an import into Azure Sentinel driven by a workflow, which if any particular workbook or artifact has some configuration requirement within it, then we can configure that here. And then the logic app will need some customization to make that work. Okay, so let's go back here. So I think we're pretty much, that's all I intended to take you through really within Sentinel. Data connectors obviously is where you want to start. The analytics then are what lights up certain parts of that data that you ingest, a whole raft of stuff out the box. So you'll immediately get instant value when you enable Sentinel and start feeding some sources to it. Various other areas here that you may want to pay attention to. But if I go back to my slides now, so we've done the demo. Hopefully that was useful, giving you some insight specifically into, what does the automation side of things look like in Sentinel? Very flexible and, comprehensive in what you can achieve. Slide is, well, okay, I like what I've seen today, hopefully, or I'm interested in taking the next step. What might that be, and how might ThirdSpace be able to help you? Well, what we'd like to do is invite you to join us for a vision call, really. This is where we'll have a conversation directly with you on a one-on-one basis, talk about your specific needs and requirements in terms of Sentinel, or indeed anything else, really, in terms of the Microsoft security and compliance portfolio. But what we typically engage with clients on are these sort of top three things. So Microsoft offers some funded workshops that we're able to deliver on their behalf for you. And the first one here is a security and Sentinel accelerator. So this might be of interest, fully funded, gives you the ability to sort of get a little bit of hands-on with Sentinel, driven by some of our experts who understand the product set intimately. If you want to get a bit more detail into Sentinel and have a bit more broader sort of exposure to it, then the Sentinel proof of concept is something that you might be interested in. This is something that we've worked with Microsoft to provide funding for. So, there's a potential of, Microsoft providing you that assistance to get that first 2 or 3 steps forward with Sentinel. And very often we just see people who say, look, I just don't know where to start. I think I've enabled everything. I think it's all done correctly. I just don't know where my gaps are, and I need to know how secure I am. So our security posture assessment would be really useful in being able to help you understand and identify those areas that need attention. So if any of that interests you, or you just want to talk more broadly about Sentinel, if you've got any specific requirements, then please get in touch with us on the telephone number there or on the email address below. Or if you've got an existing relationship, please contact your client manager or client director. They'd be very happy to arrange a vision call with one of our experts. Okay, so we're going to pop on. We've got a couple of minutes left to deal with any questions. Now, I haven't been able to have a look at this whilst I was presenting. I'm going to do that now. Okay, so we've got a couple of questions here. So in fact, let me just go back to the question slide. So it keeps me honest. So let me just read this one. So how long can Azure Sentinel retain data for? Okay, that's a really good question. So the maximum length of time that you're able to retain your data within Sentinel is 2 years. There's a hard limit for that within Sentinel itself. But lots of options to shift that information, or maybe information that doesn't provide significant security value, but still you need to keep it and query it. You can shift that into cheaper, longer term storage on the Azure platform. So we look at things like Azure Data Explorer and other solutions, or blob storage even for that. So get in touch if you need some assistance there. Another question, is it possible to tune the ML models within Sentinel, so machine learning models? At the moment, no. There's a whole raft of machine learning models within Sentinel. I think if we to have this conversation maybe in a month's time, that answer might be slightly different. So watch this space. I think Microsoft will be providing the ability to tune some of the anomaly machine learning models, but just not landed in the UK yet. So keep an eye on that. And also you can develop your own machine learning models as well. And I've got, hang on a second, let me expand this. The GoToWebinar interface, I have to say, isn't great in being able to see. Okay, so I'll grab one more question here from the list. Is ATP data feeding to Sentinel? Is that chargeable or free as one of the sources? Okay, that's a really good question. So the incident information that, in fact, my demo was based on, that would come in free of charge. So you do need to be careful about the extended information that comes in as part of that Defender 365 connector. Some of the connectors allow you to pull in a lot of discovery information that you will need to pay for. But certainly from an incident or an alert perspective, from lower level depth technologies into Sentinel, no cost for that. There's no cost for the Office 365 activity data, of which that actually contributes quite a lot, as well as the Azure Active Directory activity information as well. I'm conscious I haven't been able to get to all of the questions here. I do apologize for that, but what I can do is assure you that we'll capture those and get back to you. Just want to make sure that we finish on time. So basically, the last thing for me to say is a big thank you for those who have attended today. Hopefully that is useful, or has been useful. Get in touch if you need any more assistance, or if you just want to have a conversation about what might be relevant for you. But just a huge thank you for taking time out of your day to join us today, and yeah, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much.